We define paraphrasing as putting a passage from an author into your own words. However, what are your own words? How different must your paraphrase be from the original? The answer is it should be considerably different. The whole point of paraphrasing is to show you have read and understood another person's ideas and can summarize them in your own writing style rather than borrowing their phrases. If you just change a few words or add some bits of your own to an otherwise reproduced passage, you will probably be penalized for plagiarism. You should aim to condense and simplify a writer's ideas and describe them using different sentence structures and expressions. Technological advances are eliminating the need for bank tellers, threatening an entry point for women into the male-dominated industry, which has sought to promote more females to leadership roles. While the climb remains steep, some financial companies have managed to improve the gender balance in their executive ranks. As teller jobs dwindle, there is a risk that banks will raise the educational requirements for those jobs. An inclined plane is a simple machine with no moving parts. It is simply an even sloping surface. It makes it easier for us to move objects to higher or lower surfaces than if we lifted the objects directly upwards. It is believed that ancient Egyptians used inclined planes to carry heavy stones to build pyramids.
Artificial neural networks have recently become the state-of-the-art technique for crucial signal processing applications such as specific frequencies classification, structural health monitoring, diseases detection in power electronic circuitry, and motor fault detection. This is an unexpected outcome as there are numerous advantages of using an adaptive and compactive counterparts. Particularly, it can be efficiently trained with a limited dataset of signals besides requiring data transformation. London's National Portrait Gallery is currently celebrating the 50-year career of photographer Sandra Losada. The 21 portraits on display depict key figures in literature, film, and fashion from the early 1960s. Subsequent to the acquisition of 40 portraits by Losada, the display at the National Portrait Gallery highlights shots between 1960 and 1964, many of which feature in Losada's book Public Faces, Private Places. Formal commissioned portraits are shown alongside behind-the-scenes photographs taken on film sets and unguarded portraits on sitters captured at home. Straddling Asia and Europe across the strait, the old city of Istanbul, Turkey, has embraced diverse cultural influences. Known for its monumental architecture, Istanbul has become a cherished travel destination. Charlie Chaplin and his brother Sidney were placed in an orphanage at a very early age. Becoming a vaudeville performer, he joined Fred Carnot's company in 1906. He made his film debut in Making a Living 1914 and introduced the famous Siddy and soft-hearted gentleman tramp routine, which became his hallmark. Numerous films for various studios brought him world fame, all based on his mastery of pathos and slapstick acrobatics. English colonies emerged along the eastern seaboard for a variety of reasons. People, primarily men, originally migrated to Virginia to find gold and silver to make a quick profit. After it became evident that there were no precious metals in the area, men came to Virginia to start cultivating cash crops like tobacco. Participating regularly in physical activity has been shown to benefit an individual's health and well-being. Regular physical activity is important in reducing the risk of chronic diseases such as heart disease and stroke, obesity, diabetes, and some forms of cancer. The National Physical Activity Guidelines for Adults recommends at least 30 minutes of moderate intensity physical activity, preferably every day of the week, to obtain health benefits.
In 1861, Matthew Brady, a well-known portrait photographer, approached President Lincoln requesting permission to move freely around the country photographing the Civil War. Lincoln granted him permission to travel anywhere with the Union armies, and his record of this conflict brought home to millions the horrors of war.
As a child, you might dream one day of becoming an astronaut and the next day of becoming a ballet dancer. The possibilities are endless. Eventually, this wealth of choice is whittled down by external circumstances and internal interests. Similarly, precursor cells in early embryos make a series of stepwise decisions governed by external forces and internal factors to generate the diverse array of cell types present in adult organisms.
The scientists say this is the first documented instance of nectar that attracts a particular animal assistant being produced outside of a nectary. In fact, the observed nectar bleeding might actually be an early system that evolved to include the nectaries found in other plants today. Neil and his colleagues took to the Everglades at night, hunting for gators near and far from nests. You have to use a spotlight and you see the little demon eyes shining out of the marsh. They lassoed the gators, pulled them into the airboat, and took blood samples and body measurements.
Over time, a split would have appeared in wolf populations, he says, those wolves that feared humans and those that didn't. So this would have facilitated, I think, the domestication process, at which point humans deliberately took wolves as pets. But that domestication process, France says, may have happened more than once, first in the West, in Europe, and again in the Far East, in Asia.
The speaker reminisces about his views of the English Revolution when he was a student and how it seemed quite clear which side he was on, the aristocrats, not the Puritans. Later he realized there was more to it than that, and there were several ways of interpreting the revolution, as a struggle between the king and parliament, as a class war, or as an unpredictable situation without clear signs. Having the same dream again and again is a well-known phenomenon. Nearly 2/3 of the population report having recurring dreams. Being chased, finding yourself naked in a public place or in the middle of a natural disaster, losing your teeth, or forgetting to go to class for an entire semester are typical recurring scenarios in these dreams. From a child's point of view, what is the purpose of TV advertising? Is advertising on TV done to give actors the opportunity to take a rest or practice their lines? Or is it done to make people buy things? Furthermore, is the main difference between programs and commercials that commercials are for real, whereas programs are not, or that programs are for kids and commercials for adults?
Literature allows us to move beyond the inevitable boundaries of our own lives and culture because it introduces us to people different from ourselves, places removed from our neighborhoods, and times other than our own. Reading makes us more aware of life's possibilities as well as its subtleties and ambiguities. Literature allows us to move beyond the inevitable boundaries of our own lives and culture because it introduces us to people different from ourselves, places removed from our neighborhoods, and times other than our own. Reading makes us more aware of life's possibilities as well as its subtleties and ambiguities.
Another virtue that both propagate is that the present is meant to be enjoyed to the fullest. It is no use fretting about the past, for it cannot be undone or overturned, and no use pondering too much about the future, for it remains unseen. The day being thought about may never dawn on you. The ultimate service, however, remains the one done for your fellow men.
Within wellness paradigm of care, there would still be a place for use of medications that help people feel differently, at least for a time, sedatives, tranquilizers, and so forth. And you would still want to fund science that seeks to better understand the many pathways to debilitating mood states and to psychosis and yes, whatever biological vulnerabilities that may be present.
Line engraving on metal, which to a great extent was a development of the goldsmith's craft of ornamenting armor and precious metals, did not emerge as a printmaking technique until well into the 15th century. Copper, the metal mainly used for engraving, was expensive, and engraving itself was laborious and took a long time. For the first 2 or 3 years after the Second World War, a new title would often sell out within a few months of publication. However, unless public demand for the book was unusually high, they were rarely able to reprint it. With paper stocks strictly rationed, They could not afford to use up precious paper or tie up their limited capital with a reprint. Most succulent plants are found in regions when there is little rainfall, dry air, plenty of sunshine, porous soil, and high temperatures during part of the year. These conditions have caused changes in plant structures which have resulted greatly increased thickness of stems, leaves, and sometimes roots, enabling them to store moisture from the infrequent rains. Most succulent plants are found in regions when there is little rainfall, dry air, plenty of sunshine, porous soil, and high temperatures during part of the year. These conditions have caused changes in plant structures which have resulted greatly increased thickness of stems, leaves, and sometimes roots, enabling them to store moisture from the infrequent rains.
In the Middle Ages, the design and use of flags were considered a means of identifying social status. Flags were, therefore, the symbols not of nations, but of the nobility. The design of each flag resembled the devices on the noble's coat of arms, and the size of the flag was an indication of how high the owner stood in the nobility. Most peasants remained self-sufficient and skeptical about money, and with good reason. The triumph of capitalism probably made them worse off. They now had to deal with a centralized imperial state that was collecting tax more efficiently, giving more power to landlords, and slowly reducing customary peasant rights to land and produce. There are many kinds of pond, but nearly all are small bodies of shallow, stagnant water in which plants with roots can grow. Water movement is slight and temperatures fluctuate widely. The wealth of plants ensure that during daylight hours, oxygen is plentiful. However, at night, when photosynthesis no longer takes place, oxygen supplies can fall very low. History rubs shoulders and often overlaps with many other areas of research, from myth and epics to the social sciences, including economics, politics, biography, demography, and much else besides. Some histories are almost pure narratives, while others go in for detailed, tightly focused analyses of, for example, the parish records of a Cornish village in the 16th century. Before the time of Alexander the Great, the only Eastern people who could be compared with the Greeks in the fields of science and philosophy were from the Indian subcontinent. However, because so little is known about Indian chronology, it is difficult to tell how much of their science was original and how much was the result of Greek influence. Before the time of Alexander the Great, the only Eastern people who could be compared with the Greeks in the fields of science and philosophy were from the Indian subcontinent. However, because so little is known about Indian chronology, it is difficult to tell how much of their science was original and how much was the result of Greek influence. While far fewer people these days write letters and therefore have less use for stamps, there are still a few categories of stamp which attract collectors. Stamps in common use for an indefinite period until the price goes up are called definitive issues, while a more collectible type of stamp is the commemorative issue, honoring people, events, and anniversaries. The college has a fascinating museum dedicated to archaeology and anthropology. It contains information about many of the studies which have been carried out by members of the college over the 500 years of its existence. There are many unique exhibits brought back from excavations and explorations in all the continents. Tasmania is a large and relatively sparsely populated island off the south coast of Australia. The island is of particular interest to natural scientists who go there to research the unique wildlife. Tasmania has, for example, 12 species of bird that are not found anywhere else in the world. This term, the university is running a series of workshops for final year students on how to do well in interviews. These sessions will help participants prepare effectively for and perform at their best during later job interviews. The workshop tutors have an excellent record of success in helping students acquire the positions they desire. Tasmania is a large and relatively sparsely populated island off the south coast of Australia. The island is of particular interest to natural scientists who go there to research the unique wildlife. Tasmania has, for example, 12 species of bird that are not found anywhere else in the world. One of the major factors influencing future home design will be the probable change in climate, with hotter summers, colder winters, and the possibility of floods. Consequently, houses will be built with better insulation and will also need ways of keeping cool in hot weather, whether that's air conditioning or more shading of windows. Most countries are affected by labor migration. In many rural places, the traditional extended family has been undermined by the need for family members to migrate to towns as an economic necessity. Migration, therefore, presents a major challenge everywhere to social and economic policy. Until fairly recent times, the origin of birds was one of evolution's great mysteries. There is no longer the case. Fossil evidence from China now conclusively proves that there is an evolutionary link between birds and several types of extinct prehistoric reptiles which lived millions of years ago, or in other words, dinosaurs.